So in part one, we had what is really a conversational, almost stream of consciousness look at these concepts, and it was implied at the end of the clip that we could take this to a more practical level, the next stage of the conversation. So let's take that next step. The voices, the narrative voices. We were briefly talking about them before, and we're focusing on first person and third person, but there's a little bit more to it, isn't there? We've got, let's list them out. And there may be more than this, but let's keep the discussion simple. We've got the first person, undefined and defined. We have the second person, undefined and defined, and we have the third person, undefined and defined. But let's define these. The first person, undefined, is where I use I because I haven't created a character. Maybe I've never even considered the fact of creating a character to project out into the game world. Maybe my character is just an avatar of me. It's my personality in the game world stats operating in the game world. So that's first person, undefined. The accidental I. First person, defined is, of course, where you have created a personality that you are going to play. You sat down, you've got an archetype, or like in Storyteller, you have a nature and demeanor and that sort of things. The personality in play is not yours, and you're using I and embodying that character. Second person, undefined, is the natural state of play when we first start. There's no consistency in narrative voice. People likely aren't even aware of such a thing in their gaming yet. So people are saying my character, people are saying I, people are saying he, she, people are using their character names and descriptions. They're going through all the possible narrative voices just as convenient or as the mood flows. It constantly shifts. It's constantly in flux. It's all random. It's the natural state of the new gamer. Second person, defined. People have been playing for a while, and they find a way of describing action that they enjoy. So one guy at the table is saying I, and his character is an avatar of his own natural personality. And sitting right next to him is a guy who's using I, but he's got a defined character that is nothing like him. And sitting next to them is the guy who's still saying my character. And sitting next to him is a girl who's describing all of her actions in the third person using her character's name and getting very, very descriptive about clothing and facial expressions and whatnot. So all of these different narrative voices are coexisting at the table, and the game master is shifting in between them, but there's no real consistency from player to player to player or with the GM's preference. The third person, undefined, is, again, I've mentioned it earlier in second person. This is the guy who says, my character, Tom's character. Won't use character names and is very intentionally creating a barrier or distance between himself and those characters. He's very definitely the player, and he's moving pieces inside the game. Third person, defined, is what Sameoldji is talking about a lot in his descriptions of the Wraith game that he's playing in. So this is where we say, Jack Coltrane moves calmly down the hall, exuding confidence and tenacity. He slowly pulls his coat back, those level of details, like you would read in a novel or like you'd read in a screenplay, with the intent of broadcasting the information as if we were setting the scene in a theater class or setting the scene before we're about to film, so that we encourage all of that very visual imagination, and we can immerse ourselves in that scene or immerse ourselves in the story that's going on supporting that scene. We have all the details, right? And we're sharing them all, right? So it's he and she and they. So I'm not immersing myself in the character per se. I'm immersing myself in the experience of the character, and it can be extremely powerful and very, very visual. And that visual experience can be reinforced by the other players at the table because you're working to create a shared experience, whereas with first person, this is not necessarily a requirement. So those are the voices that I'd like to talk about. Now, in all of these voices, we have the option to allow for different degrees of omniscience. How much information am I going to share about the internal life of my character? Right? So like in a very strong simulationist game, you might share nothing other than what you show on your face or reveal through the tone of your voice. Right? You might not ever say, my character's upset. But using that idea of the character is upset, okay? So I might say, as dialogue, I'm upset. And reveal through my tone the varying degrees to which I'm upset, right? I'm upset, meaning I'm not really upset, or upset, right? So that's up to you. You can do this for each of the levels, of course. How much do you reveal, right? In first person, or in the chaos of second person, or in the very carefully controlled third person. How much do you share? Again, this is something that you decide before play, for whatever purpose of play that you're going for. So we may limit ourselves to purely verbal description, or we may mix and match verbal and physical performance, or combining elements of each. All of these go toward context, right? Helping to establish a consistent and coherent context that everybody can draw from, so that they can reliably interpret what your character is doing as if they were their character and they were real, and you were your character and that character is real. In the same way that we would interact together in the real world, we try and encourage this contextual understanding somehow in the game. And this might be by simply saying, my character's upset, so he's reacting inappropriately to the situation, or by demonstrating inappropriate reactions and allowing the other player the immersive experience of figuring that out. Okay. Now the other issue to go over then was narrative agency. In all of these defined voices, just like we have the ability to control how much omniscience we're allowing, we also have the ability to control switching between game states. So from the first person point of view, switching between in character and out of character. We have control to a large extent over when we do that and how often we do that. Now, in the third person, I mean, honestly, I don't feel like in character is directly applicable a term to third person as it is to first person. But I don't mean that the experience is any less intense. The intention of in character versus out character definitely maps directly to third person play, but it's more like being in story and out of story. You have things that you want to communicate to create the story in third person, the shared experience of that scene, and sometimes you do that through your narrative voice of defining the character, and sometimes you have to step out as the player and ask a question, right? Which breaks immersion, or at least stops the scene. So we have in character and out of character, we have in scene and out of scene, or in story and out of story. And maintaining a long, coherent, consistent flow in character or in story requires skill and practice. It's not something that you can just do unless you're four and actually believe that something under the bed is drooling. So in both of these game states, we need to be aware of the concepts that we've talked about before, like premature imagination, right? Respect for the genre, respect for the established reality of the game. But if the game is new, if the people playing it haven't played it before, we have to cut some slack. The game master needs to be able to provide exposition that explains how the world works. And the players need to be able to ask clarification questions. But as that kind of orientation period goes on, there should be a very explicit agenda toward moving from this more relaxed IC, OOC, in character, out of character, state switching. There needs to be a clear agenda if you have somewhere to go, if you want to get to a very immersive first person or a very immersive third person experience, you need to state clearly that with each session you're trying to get closer to that goal. So it doesn't come as a surprise, like, oh, suddenly today, no more out of character questions. You can ask me during the break. I mean, that works for nobody. All right. So narrative agency then, when a description is no longer good enough for what's taking place in the scene, like you get a quick description of a garage that you've entered, then a lot of things happen, a fight breaks out. What was described originally to set the scene of the garage is no longer suitable for the scene of combat in the garage. And so the players need to be able to get more information, and they're all jazzed up because this combat's about to start, and the mechanical process of the combat may be disruptive for some of the players already. So from a skill point of view, we'd like to minimize the amount of time we have to spend switching to out of character or out of story. So we need to find a way in character or in story to ask what's here. And Premature Imagination is one of the game killers for me, right? Players hate it when the game master tells them what they know, tells them what they think, tells them what they feel. But as a game master, I lose immersion when the player is taking things past the mechanics to a foregone conclusion. And we've talked about this in other clips. So saying that I pick up a tire iron and I smash his head in, even though we're going to have to then stop and resolve whether or not there was any head smashing, right, is a problem. It's the same problem as what occurs on the GM side of the screen by just cutting the player out of the decision process of what is thought or felt. So being aware of these elements and remembering to state things as intentions. I'm looking for something, rather than I pick up the object that I want. I'm looking for something. Now, if you have a high degree of omniscience in the game, you can just say what you're looking for. I'm looking for a tire iron. Is there one? Right? I'm looking for a tire iron. You know, Jack Coltrane opens the trunk of the car looking for a tire iron. Or you could say Jack Coltrane opens the trunk of the car and looks inside. In both cases, we get a description of what's in the trunk. In the first example, we get a case where the players know exactly what's going on because we shared the internal thought process. In the second case, we just know what the actions are. All of these are choices. All of these are really interesting choices that produce a very different feel to the game. And what's cool about these techniques is that if you're sincere about them, they work every time.